Uzbekistan, a country in Central Asia, has a horrific tradition of cotton slavery. Ranking among the top of 2016's Global Slavery Index report, Uzbekistan has a deeply ingrained system of modern slavery. The government state of Uzbekistan owns most of its land, meaning farmers within the country don't own their own land and farms, but rather lease them from the government. This system allows for the government to impose cotton production quotas on its own people and publicly shames and punishes those who don't meet these quotas. The government has, in other words, created a monopoly on its cotton industry and benefits immensely off the back of its own citizens. As every annual harvest comes, civilians are recruited and forced to pick cotton to meet their quotas. This doesn't mean just farmers though. Teachers, doctors, and even children are taken from their schools and forced to work. They are slaves to their own country and are placed in camps with horrific work conditions, often without even having running water. Knowing this, over 70% of major retailers like Gap and Levi's have strict policies not to buy cotton sourced from Uzbekistan, and it would seem that other major clothing companies like Forever 21, H&M, Toys R Us, and Urban Outfitters would as well never source their material from Uzbekistan. However, all four companies have sourced cotton produced in the country. Much of the cotton from Uzbekistan ends up in countries like China and Bangladesh, making it extremely hard to identify where their cotton was harvested. Forever 21 is believed to continue to source a majority of their cotton from Uzbekistan even today, where again, children as young as just 8 to 9 years old are taken from schools and forced into labor. H&M, on the other hand, has attempted to counter this and has aimed for all of their cotton to be sourced from sustainable, fully traceable sources by 2020. The Ivory Coast, an extremely poor region of West Africa, exports hundreds of thousands of tons of cocoa annually. In fact, nearly half of all the world's cocoa. People in this region, in desperate hopes of work, are told that there's opportunity for work if they are willing to travel. Crowds of men, women, and young children leave their villages and even leave their countries in pursuit of this work. But every year, thousands encounter a world of captive slavery. Traffickers sell these people to farmers for as little as just $20. They are now the farmers' property and are forced into cocoa plantations and used for hard labor. Once in this dark system of slavery, it is nearly impossible for them to escape. They experience horrible work conditions and are locked away in tiny huts after a hard day's work every evening, given just small tin cans to use as toilets. To counter disobedience, they are beaten relentlessly by their masters every morning and evening until they are left nearly unconscious. They are then forced to work and watched extremely closely. This is done until they are deemed to have accepted their fate as slaves. They are told that if they ever attempt to escape, they will be killed, and it is this instilled fear that keeps them obedient to their masters. As stated, nearly half of the world's cocoa comes from the Ivory Coast. Of the cocoa that comes from the Ivory Coast, it is estimated that up to 90% of plantations use some form of slavery. This is a shocking statistic, as it means that at least 2/5 of the world's cocoa is tainted by slavery. With falling prices of cocoa, more and more farmers are buying and using slaves. Companies like Hershey, Mars, Kraft, and Nestle have all been directly linked to slavery. In 2001, media sources revealed that Nestle had been using farms on the Ivory Coast in which 600,000 children had been kept in slave-like conditions. Shockingly though, Nestle kept on using these same farms right up until 2012, when a second major report revealed just what was going on. While the company has pledged to change their ways, it is unapparent if anything has truly been changed. In 2016, the Fair Labor Association reported that 70% of Nestle's farms were not trained on the fact that slavery was even illegal. They also reported that, quote, there is no process in place to monitor, report, and remediate cases of forced labor at the farms, end quote. Even in 2016, evidence of child labor in dangerous conditions getting paid little to nothing remains. Foxconn, a China-based company, has become very well known as a major manufacturer in Apple products. It is also known as a company with various stories of abuse and labor violations. Reports of horrible work conditions, cramped living, and forcing workers to work upwards of 100 hours a week began to leak out of the company years ago, causing global outrage, with customers demanding retailers using Foxconn to improve their conditions. The biggest of which was, of course, Apple. Apple claimed that they were doubling down on improving conditions for their workers, and while indeed some aspects have improved, reports from as recently as 2013 seem to indicate that there's much left to be improved. Foxconn has been known to punish its employees by forcing them to clean toilets, sweep grass lawns, and write confession letters that are shown publicly to other workers to shame them. Living conditions for these workers are extremely cramped, with upwards of 20 to 30 workers sharing tiny 3-bedroom flats, meaning that up to 10 employees at a time are cramped into just one small bedroom. These conditions lead to extreme depression for many workers who are left with choosing between extreme poverty back in the villages where they come from or being essentially used as slaves. This causes record numbers of employees committing suicide at Foxconn. To combat this, the company has installed netting to stop suicides. Along with this, many employees were made to sign agreements stating that their families were not allowed to sue Foxconn if they were ever to commit suicide. This, rather than fixing the problem, simply covered the company legally. Among the harsh work conditions was that staff were made to stand without sitting for the entirety of their shifts. In response to the outrage that came when this leaked though, workers were allegedly given stools to sit on. However, workers have claimed that they are forced to sit only on 1/3 of the stool seat to, quote, keep them nimble. One worker interviewed in an article posted by The Guardian claimed that at times of high iPhone sales, workers at Foxconn were made to work upwards of 100 hours a week. While these workers aren't technically slaves, as they can choose to leave at any time, workers endure these horrible work conditions because they come from extreme poverty and have no other way to provide for their families. Taking advantage of these desperate people, Foxconn treats its employees as they wish. While Foxconn has been greatly associated with Apple, in reality the company produces products for a variety of other Western companies as well, like Amazon, Hewlett-Packard, and Dell. 400 miles east of Delhi lies the Indian Carpet Belt. From here, 16 million pounds of carpets are imported just to Britain alone every year. In the very poor North Bihar, India, thousands of young children go missing as a result of being tricked into, lied to, and even kidnapped for slavery. Families search far and wide for their children as young as just 5 years old, but there is little to no hope once these children are gone. Though slavery is condemned in India, thousands of child labor camp children are found annually working in these carpet looms. This multi-million-dollar industry stems from and is operated out of small, average, normal-looking houses where, from the outside, it could never be known the abuse that goes on inside. Children are woken up at 5 in the morning and are put straight to work for 7 days a week. They work until midnight. These children, who are often stolen at extremely young ages, are sold to loom owners and are used to weave carpets for up to a staggering 20 hours a day, sleeping only 2 to 3 hours a night. These children never leave these small homes, never even seeing the outside. Impossible to escape, these looms are often cramped, hot, and locked from the outside. Children are beaten for subpar workmanship and are often not even allowed to use toilets. The horrific conditions leave children physically and emotionally scarred. Sadly though, these villages rely heavily on the carpet industry. Boycotting the buying of these goods from India entirely only makes the poor even poorer. The best thing we can do in the Western world is to simply ensure that we only purchase carpets produced legally and ethically, and ones that are labeled accordingly. 9 out of 10 carpets that aren't marked are believed to have been, at least in part, made by child slaves. Astonishingly, very few major retailers in North America and Europe ensure that they sell properly labeled rugs imported from India. According to a study by FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University, Macy's, Target, and IKEA are just a few of the many companies linked to the Indian Carpet Belt. While countless companies have been caught using illegally sourced cotton that is then used in the production of their clothing, it isn't just the cotton material that is produced using slavery. The actual production of sewing and putting together the clothing itself is often traced to slavery as well. In 2000, a Senate subcommittee hearing revealed that numerous major companies like Target, Gap, JCPenney, Calvin Klein, and Abercrombie & Fitch, just to name a few, used sweatshop labor in Saipan.
Shameful violation of human rights on American soil, the U.S. territory of Saipan, an island in the Pacific. Allegations that some young Asian women have become virtual indentured servants on the island.
Saipan, an island located in the Pacific, while technically a U.S. territory, sets its own immigration laws. People from various impoverished countries were lured into immigrating to the island under false promises of jobs on American soil. When arriving to the island, though, these immigrants were forced to repay fees of up to $7,000, an amount far greater than any of them had. As a way to repay their fees, they were enslaved and forced to sew clothing for 12 hours or more a day, 7 days a week. They were also forced to refrain from practicing any religion, having children, or getting married. ABC News reported that women who became pregnant were forced into abortions to keep them working. A National Labor Committee report claimed workers were given just 3.3 minutes to sew together a woman's Victoria's Secret bikini. These bikinis, on the other hand, were sold for $14, while the worker was paid just 4 pennies. Saipan, which again is technically a U.S. territory, made for a giant loophole in which these companies could label their clothing as made in the USA, despite using sweatshop labor. Seemingly not having learned from the ordeal, retail giant Gap was found again in 2007 to have been using slaves in a New Delhi factory where workers as young as just 8 years old were sewing together clothing. It is unknown if Gap has made any changes today. In southern Asia, Bangladesh is another major hub for clothing sweatshops where an estimated 3 to 4 million workers in nearly 5,000 sweatshops are currently working. Factories are built by American companies to manufacture clothing. These companies in turn then outsource much of that labor to sweatshops. This creates somewhat of a shield to protect companies from scrutiny. In 2014, a sweatshop in Bangladesh suddenly locked their doors from the outside, telling workers that they were just doing a simple drill. In reality, though, a fire had broken out, and in order to ensure a group of slaves didn't come running out of the building in front of potential witnesses, management locked the doors and let over 100 people burn to death simply to cover themselves. Just a year prior, a sweatshop collapsed, killing over 1,000 people, causing Disney finally to pull out of the country. However, on the other hand, Walmart has remained in the country despite these occurrences, continuing to use slave sweatshops to produce their clothing.